We will now move on to the next presentation. You have probably written one. The next presentation comes from the CFO and also Deputy CEO of VOI Technology. And he's already up here on stage. Mathias Hermansson. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning everyone, and thanks a lot for spending time with us here. And we are obviously very happy to be here with Naventus and our good friend Jonas here, who's heading up Naventus. My name is Mathias, as you heard. I'm the CFO and Deputy CEO of VOI, VOI Technology, as we're called. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, why. First, I think why we exist. Also a little bit what we do, and then finally I think try to tell a little bit about also what we have been doing over the last 6 to 9 months, which has been a quite messy year, I would say, not only for us in mobility, but for most, I guess. So why? I'll let this sink in a little bit. The founder of VOI is called Fredrik Hjelm, one of the co-founders. He's 29 years old. And has built this company over the last 2 years. He used to live in Moscow, and I actually also spent quite a lot of time in Moscow. But this is just one of the examples of what is wrong with society today. What we do at VOI, we have another vision of the future, and that's the vision of creating cities made for living. And I think that comes from the DNA of the company, that we are maybe more a city-first company rather than almost a technology company first, or even almost even a consumer company first. Just one, if you take one step back and think a little bit about what is significant with the new generation of companies. I think you've seen the Spotifys of the world and the Klarnas and so on. They are all, coming from, the millennial generation. I think it's, and for me, it's a little bit older. I used to be in, large cap listed companies and was probably seen as young, promising for many years. And all of a sudden, I became the oldest one at VOI. And I think when I look at the Klarnas and the Spotifys, I feel that they are run by young people, the new generation. I think what's happening now, when you look at the Krys of the world and also VOIs of the world, they are run by the next generation even. So Fredrik, who's one of the co-founders, he's 29, as I said. And there's a completely different mindset right now, and I'm really happy to be part of that, because I didn't see it before, really. More than having them as a target group for our consumer businesses where I used to work. But here it's really, a passion and purpose-driven company. People go to work and they do that not only because they want to build something or they want to have a salary or they want to have status or whatever it is. They actually on a mission to create something. And I feel that as well. When I sit at home in my suburb, one of the real things is that you want to be able to tell your grandchildren that you were on the right side of history when this change started. You were part of pushing society forward in the right direction. So I just give you a couple of illustrations. What is really wrong and what's happening right now? It's really, even before Corona and COVID, people were actually, both consumers and also politicians were already, of course, thinking about this. I showed one of the other speakers here just before this slide. I think it's, you can talk about, electrification. It's so great for the environment. So I'm actually buying a used electric car today, this afternoon. But it doesn't really change the picture. It doesn't really matter if it's combustion engines, if it's electrical engines, or even if it's autonomous, which someone believes will be a kind of a salvation for the future. I used to work in that industry on the board of a company called Sinuity in Gothenburg, for those of you who know it. But it's actually going to create more cars even, probably, if that is playing out right over the next 10, 15 plus years. So what we want to do is, of course, look at the last piece here is find a way to be part of creating a more modern city. People talk a lot about, and particularly in Stockholm. Stockholm is one of the most unregulated markets in Europe when it comes to e-scooters that we do, micromobility. You know, people talk about all the parking clutters. I think what this is important to remember, you know, that probably 95% of all streets, of all that's real estate in the streets are made for cars. If you just take one car parking spot, you can fit easily 20 scooters parking there. And we have technology that actually makes it, you know, incentivized for actually people to park in those parking spots. It's also, if you look at, as I mentioned before, you know, energy consumption for micromobility and shared micromobility, we believe will be the future. If you look here, for example, you know, if you have even if you have an electrical vehicle, it's 20 times more energy efficient to go on a shared electrical vehicle compared to electrical cars. When we look then around where does this micromobility sit in all transportations, because we are a mobility company, we try to transport right now at least people from A to B. You can kind of see that you know, 60% of all trips taken in Europe is less than 10 kilometers. And I think when we look at our data that we see, 12% of all the trips that are taken by voice, and right now we're more than 30 million trips have been taken over the last 2 years. 12% of them actually replacing a car trip in the cities. And also, I think what's also important or interesting to see is that a little bit more than half, or almost 2/3 of all trips are actually in connection to public transit or the trips as well. So it's very, very complementary and actually taking away problems for cities. So just a quick few words on actually, you know, who are we and what are we doing? The snapshot is really, as I said, more than 30 million rides in less than 2 years. We are present in around 50 cities across Europe, narrowed down to only focusing on Europe. And we have around 20 public transit collaborations across Europe. So there you can clearly see that this is something we do together with public transit and together with cities. Just to give you a brief overview on actually how does this business look like. I mean, we are not the traditional marketplace, a two-sided marketplace like the Ubers of the world or some of the other ones that you've seen that scales very quickly. We are actually one-sided marketplace. We're a technology-enabled asset manager who's actually providing mobility services for consumers. And just, you know, this, you don't have to go through this slide, it's quite busy. But as you can see, we're involved in everything from designing hardware, designing IoT and connectivity, because just a few years back, this service was not even possible to run, because we didn't have the technology that could enable this service. So we do that. We ship them. We have a big logistics business around Europe. So it's heavy operations. I used to joke and say this is a little bit like you marry a Spotify together with Lufthansa's ground operation and try to make sense out of that, because that's how hardcore local operations you have on the ground. And that's everything from charging, battery swapping, repairs, and predictive maintenance, for example. And some things that we are over-indexing on and spent a lot of money on over the last 12 months is, of course, data analytics. Some people call it machine learning. Clever people like you probably know that it's not really full machine learning, but it's very, very deep predictive analytics, where we identify where should we put scooters and when, because the availability of scooters is one of the key drivers, not only for revenues and the service, but also for actually not providing clutter across the cities, which is important for us. So what has happened this year so far? As I said in the beginning, I think mobility and transportation has been one of the sectors that have been hardest hit, I think, in this space. If you look to the right on this slide, to the left on this slide, you can see even today, I think around 40% lower mobility in European cities as it is a normal year. So we're still very, coming back to normal activity levels in the cities, and a lot of sectors, I think, can see that. Obviously, for next year, we'll have to see what happens. But I think even in a scenario like this, we managed to record our first break-even, EBITDA group break-even in June, and we've been EBITDA break-even since then. Some of you have maybe seen how much money we lost in 2019, and I think that's That's a fair point, and we get that question quite a lot, but I think one of the reasons why we have managed to build such a big franchise around Europe is that we have invested quite a lot in technology and the back end, in our own connectivity solutions, IoT solutions, and also, of course, in the fleet. I think what's coming out of COVID, I think, and the lockdowns, I mean, most cities were of course shut down during the summer, or the early summer, late spring. This coming out of this actually accelerated both consumer and also regulatory demand for our products. I think we've seen a mind shift when it comes to cities. As an example, I think the UK, in the UK, all shared scooter services were illegal up until May this year. When they came out of lockdown, they said this is something we want to have in our country. So they legalized it in 4 weeks. Now, no one has seen that in the UK, such a fast process. And then already now, I think more than 50 cities and regions across UK have gone out with tenders, and most of them have now already awarded operators to run services. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. I think the other thing that's happened this year compared to last year as well is that we've seen a leap change, a revolution in terms of durability, operational efficiency, and also unit economics as a result of that. So now today, I think when we put out a scooter in May this year, that scooter was paid back within 3 months. So already now, we are moving away from the perception, at least, that we put out a scooter and it lasts only for 8 weeks, and then it's gone. And I think the last point here that we have done this year, we believe very successfully, is of course we have been taking a step ahead of all competition we've seen in Europe, both Limes, both Tier, and also Bird, who are the 3 major competitors so far. Just a quick recap on how has this performance, how's it looking over the course of this year. To the right here, you can see that pre-corona we were on a good track of doing really well. Corona, a big lockdown. We lost more than 55% of number of rides versus the year before. And of course now, when we look at September, at the end of Q3, we do all-time high, more than during the summer, and I think it's more than double of the performance of last year, in spite of the fact that mobility is 40% less or down in these European cities. So we, in spite of all the tough times, I think we feel quite strong. And there are really 3 things that I think is long-term building moats in this industry, which people really think may be kind of generic. One is licenses. As I mentioned earlier, I think we believe that, and we want to see that all cities in Europe should issue licenses, should regulate this industry. We had competition from Lime and Bird, who had probably 10-15 times more capital than us. And part of the reason why this industry has started to have a bad reputation was that the Limes of the world, they came to Europe, they carpet bombed all cities, particularly in Paris, with tens of thousands of scooters, and couldn't take care of them on the ground. We took a very different approach where we instead try to make sure that we do it in collaboration with cities. And for those of you who live here in Stockholm, you see that there's quite a few scooters still here in Stockholm, but actually Stockholm is probably one of the least regulated cities in Europe for micromobility in this sense. So in the beginning of this year, I think very little of our scooters were placed in markets where we had licenses. If we look already now in the fall, 45% of all our scooters, and now we're running approximately 50,000 scooters every day out in the streets of Europe. So roughly 45% of them are actually under license, and a lot of them under exclusive license even. And if we look that into next year, I think we will see that more than 50% of our scooters are also on the license, which is something that I think that worked quite well for us. And if you look in the competitive landscape, and here is a map of all licenses issued in Europe to date. We at VOI, we have won close to 15% of those licenses, or the volume of scooters under those licenses. And what's remarkable to see here is that the US strategy of ask for forgiveness, not for permission type of approach that you've seen the likes of Uber also have taken here in Europe. doesn't really seem to work, because here they get cracked down on by regulators and they don't get the licenses. So you clearly can see not the only thing that, except for that we of course are winning quite a lot, is that the other European operators are also taking a much bigger share than the Americans. Even though Lime is right now the largest in the world in terms of size. So not only cities like us, I think also consumers. NPS is not Net Promoter Score. I think this is also something we are obsessed with in the company, where we are, in Europe, the most, have the highest customer satisfaction. Globally, I think the Americans have slightly higher, but that's because they score extremely high in the US, where none of the European operators are, I guess, as part of the reason. The last point on this one, I think, is something we are obsessed with as well, is operational efficiency and capital efficiency, given that we are actually buying all the scooters and they're not super cheap. So it's important that we utilize those assets the most. So here is basically us, this is third-party data, us against tier, where on the right-hand side, you can see that we are around 40% higher number of trips and rides per scooter a day. And this is obviously something that is extremely important, because it also goes straight into capital efficiency and the payback of the scooters that I talked to you before about. So also one thing, you've seen, unit economics is something that the industry is talking quite a lot about, and this is an example here that there has been a true step change, not only in technology and hardware, but also the way we operate the business. If you look at compared to last summer, the cost, the OPEX, the cost per operating a scooter every day has gone down by 70%. And if you look only compared with the spring, before we rolled out the latest generation swappable battery scooters, the cost has gone down 40%. And this is only the beginning. I think this industry, as I said, is only 2 years old. And I think we're not even, we're not even in the end of the beginning. It's we're still in the beginning of the beginning, to quote, or to misquote probably someone else. Lower OPEX in this way and higher fleet utilization also enables us to roll out new products like subscriptions, which we rolled out first in the world on the back of a very, very strong and talented engineering team. So basically already now around just above 10% of all our revenues are coming from monthly recurring subscriptions, which is kind of unique. And I think we see our world going from unregulated pay-as-you-go revenues to regulated licensed markets and recurring revenues. And this is kind of the path that we're on. And technology is the enabler of this. I also said that we are also happy that we've secured also asset-backed financing for scooters going into next year. I mean, this is something big that the whole industry have been fighting for, as it's early, that equity investors have to put in equity that we buy hardware for. So now we have completely changed this model to do a little bit more like the car rental companies can do, where you actually have asset-backed financing that actually makes equity holders, of course, being able to invest more in market expansions and technology, for example. So overall, I think that gives us, as the first company in the industry in the world, I think that we were EBITDA break even in June. Obviously, it's a high season in the summer, so it's a little bit artificially doped, but we were the first one to have true EBITDA profitability since in June. And we've been EBITDA positive since then. And when we look into next year, depending on obviously how demand and mobility looks like overall, we feel in our base case scenario that we will probably have a double-digit EBITDA margin for the whole year of next year, including the winter seasons and so on. So I think I leave with that, and I think happy to have any questions if you have or anything else. And
well, absolutely. Thank you very much, Patrick. Matthias. I don't know where the battery came from. Sorry. You want to create more sustainable cities. Very admirable. I think everybody agrees that we really need to have less cars in the city centers for many reasons. There is a lot of critique on the scooter business for littering the streets and also for that the scooters end up in the waterways. So how do we stay ahead of the game and make sure that you are responsible also in this aspect?
I think it's a very, very good question. I think if you compare, I think most people who are looking at Stockholm, and Stockholm is one of the messiest cities, I think, in Europe around this. If you think about what we're doing right now together with the UK, I mean, we got a license in West Midlands in England. Birmingham is much bigger city than Stockholm. There we work hand in hand with the city, where we basically have parking racks allowed to put on the streets. We have incentivized parking zones where connectivity and GPS makes us, if you park in a parking space that we should, you get a credit and discount in the next ride. If you park somewhere else, you have to pay a little bit more.
Does anybody else do this?
No, we have an exclusive license there, so we can work hand in hand together with the city there. So there's a different way of doing this than I think that Stockholm has chosen to do. I think there, and we'd rather work together with the cities in this perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Mathias.
No problem. Thanks.